Instead of saying, this sucks, I can't do it, I try to reframe it into, this is a learning opportunity. How can I do it with whatever I have? On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is soy latte. So grab your mugs and let's chat about our 20s. Happy Soju Friday! Welcome back to Soju with Sarah. I'm your host, Sarah, and welcome to this podcast about navigating life, adulthood, your 20s, 30s, and beyond. We are in a different place today. So I usually try to keep the podcast pretty consistent. So if you notice, we're in like an empty-ish room. This is me back at home. So I usually try to batch film things before I head out so that I can have our usual setup, but it's been a really busy couple of weeks and I just haven't gotten a chance to catch up. So I'm filming at home and I'm actually going to be here for a couple more days. It's been a long couple of weeks. Also, happy holidays. I hope you guys enjoyed Thanksgiving. I feel like during the holiday season, my craving is to not do anything, but then somehow it always ends up being the busiest season of the year. I remember back when I was working as a software engineer, this season would be all about wrap up, and I know people would take time off and like things would be kind of slower, but it just feels so chaotic still. Anyways, happy holidays. I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know how you guys spent Thanksgiving, whether or not you went back home, whether or not you celebrate Thanksgiving. I know for our Soju shotties that are out there that don't live in the US, you probably don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but it's always a really festive season, and I have Christmas music playing literally from the time that Halloween happens till the beginning of the year. Anyways, because we are back at home, I usually don't have that complex of a drink, but today we're drinking soy latte. My personal preference is always for oat latte, but my parents don't have oat milk. I feel like that's a very millennial Gen Z craze, like the oat milk craze. So we're settling for a soy latte, although I think soy milk is healthier. Maybe I'm making that up. But anyways, I have my usual instant coffee, which I'm not the proudest of that I don't have a coffee machine or like make fresh coffee every morning. But instant coffee is so clutch. So yeah, cheers to instant soy coffee. I don't know why I feel so awkward today. I think it is just because the setting's a little bit different. Whenever I have work or stuff I need to do, including filming this podcast episode, I kind of feel like a kid in my bedroom, just like playing make-believe, whatever reality I'm trying to imagine for myself. So it feels a little bit weird, but it's been very busy. So right before I got back home for Thanksgiving, I actually was in this giant sprint of trying to wrap up my orders for my first drop that I did for my ceramics business. And that was so hectic. I really wasn't expecting it to be so much work, but I had done this model where I had a certain subset of ceramics that I made that was ready to ship, and then half of that inventory was not ready to ship, aka something that I would have to make before I left for the holidays and ship it out to people. Usually I'm a little bit faster, but this time around, for some reason, everything kept going wrong in the pottery studio. So as I was trying to finish up the batches, I would have like half of the batches be failures, or there'd be glaze issues or stilt marks that were on the actual piece on the glaze. And so I ended up having such a tough time trying to hit my sales count for the amount of ceramics that I had sold for my first batch. And I was up working till the very, very last minute. So I finally got that shipped out, and the amount of stress that I felt for that surpassed what I was expecting. But you live and you learn, and I feel like I learned so much through that process. One of the learnings being that I don't think I'm going to do pre-orders for my ceramics, just because there's so many things that I feel like I can't control, including the communal studio and their schedule for firing. I also did my second drop. So exactly a month later, November 30th, so very recently, I did my second drop, which was only exclusively for my email list subscribers on whenjune.com. That also went so terribly. I think sometimes I'm very high anxiety, and so that might contribute to it. But the day of the launch, I actually checked right before, like half an hour right before, to see if there was any issues with the website. I had a new product I was dropping, which was a little boot that I was working on in the studio for the last couple of weeks. And I remember for the first drop, someone had told me that they had an item in their cart, but then it got snatched out of their cart because everything sold out within 2 minutes, which I'm so grateful for. However, I didn't realize that the customer experience was so bad. And so when she told me that, I really wanted to fix it so that the customer experience could be better. So I added this little Shopify widget, which lets you reserve things in your cart. Little did I know that that was just like a scam app. And so I paid for the premium subscription and everything. But when I went to check it the day of my second drop, I realized that that widget didn't reserve the items and take it out of my inventory. So like infinite people could put it in their cart and it would have that little banner up top. Definitely my fault for not actually checking, but I just assumed that if you're gonna install an app within like the Shopify interface that it would work. So then I was scrambling to figure out a different system. Everything glitched. Terrible drop experience. I think in the first 5 minutes I realized that no one was able to actually place an order with a new widget that I installed. So I feel so bad. And with everything that happens with my small business that goes wrong or gives people a bad experience, I feel so responsible and very guilty. And so I'm trying to work on how to streamline things, how to make things better, how to preempt these problems and fix them. And it's just been a really big learning process. But I think for that reason, I've just been so stressed and so busy the last couple of weeks. But anyways, that was a little ramble about how my Thanksgiving went. I think I dropped right after Thanksgiving, but Thanksgiving itself was very, very calm, very nice. Our family isn't the most festive, but there's always food and there's always stuff to be eating and consuming. And that is one of my favorite parts of the holidays, just being able to eat food. But otherwise, I am very, very excited for Christmas. I feel like this Christmas is going to be a little bit different because me and my boyfriend, James, we're actually going to be celebrating Christmas together. Every year for the last couple of years, we've been kind of trading off who gets what holiday because we have our little kitty Moose, aka the producer on this podcast, who has not shown up to work for a while. Ever since we got him, we've been trading off holidays, and everyone assumes that we just go to, we swap whoever's home, but I think it's always a little bit of a lonely holiday because one of us wants to stay with our little kitty. But this year is going to be a little bit different because James and I are both going to stay in the city and try to celebrate together. I'm actually really excited for that. I feel like traveling during the holidays is also very overwhelming. And so just being able to stay home, cook a nice meal, maybe watch a nice Christmas movie would be very fun. If you're watching the video, you can probably see my pajamas now. I'm doing that thing where, you know how when you're working remotely, you have your like sweats or pajamas on, but then you have like a button up just for the camera so that your coworkers think you're dressed nicely. Yeah, that's me right now. I don't know. I become so sloppy when I'm at home for the holidays. It's actually quite embarrassing. If you ever catch me on the streets in the suburbs, I'm a totally different person. Anyways, today's episode is going to be a little bit of a list. You guys know that I love my lists and I love sharing reflections, things I've learned, lessons, all in a list format. I wanted to talk about habits that helped me navigate my 20s. There's a lot of things I've learned over the years, and especially the last couple of months since my life's been more in flux, that I've been reflecting on and exactly how these habits have been helping me. And I wanted to share it with you guys, whether you're in your 20s, in your 30s, I feel like some of this might apply, or just wanting to hear about good habits I've built up. But the first thing that I want to say is setting up a system for myself very early in my 20s was such a lifesaver in a way. I remember in college, we got unlimited storage on Google Drive, which I don't think they offer anymore, but that was so life-changing because I started uploading every single thing, whether it was academic related, like my homeworks, my notes, my things that I would win awards for, my scholarships, everything onto Google Drive. But I kept a documentation of everything, anything from like annual taxes, photographs. I had a folder specifically for my relationship, so James and I would throw in like meaningful photos and PowerPoints we made each other, gifts, stuff like that into the drive. And I think the biggest thing that actually was very helpful was having a very organized system around my drive. So I remember for every school year that would be separated into its own folder, own directory. Within every school year, every class would have its own section and folder. And I always made sure that things were labeled. If something had a wonky title, I would change it to something that made sense so that I could always access stuff. I realized how useful this was when I got into my older 20s or like mid 20s, because there would be times where I would be like, oh my God, where was that video that James had made me for my 21st birthday? And I would search up like Sarah's 21st birthday. it would be there. And I think eventually it just became like this huge archive. And I'm sure you probably have a similar system. If you don't, you should definitely create one. But at some point, what had happened though was all of my stuff, including my family stuff, my relationship stuff, my life stuff, and then my content stuff, was housed in this alumni account on Google Drive. And last year, our school had told us that we needed to migrate everything off because they were limiting the storage to 25 gigabytes. So they started with unlimited and then they somehow went down to 25 gigabytes. And I was freaking out because by the time that they made us do that, I had 13 terabytes of stuff stored onto my Google Drive. Granted, this is probably not the amount of storage that you'll need to house like your life online in a digital format, but I just had so much footage because I had also put all of my content stuff onto Google Drive. Basically any spare footage, stuff that I had filmed over the years, everything went onto Google Drive. And so last year I actually spent a ton of time, bought a ton of hard drives, migrated everything off. But one of the things about having this storage system and having it so organized the last couple of years is it's just been so easy to reference stuff in my life. If I need to find a really random clip of me doing something, or my tax forms from like 2018, just every single thing was so easy for me to find, especially when I had the Google Drive. Now I have to go into my hard drives. I think I'm very grateful too, because having documentation of your life feels really meaningful. The more you build up experiences and the more you have stuff that you get reminded of. I've also learned that if you don't keep organized from the beginning, then you just end up having such a hard time tracing back your past. I'm actually curious how many people do have a system for themselves that they've set up early on, because I just assumed that most people do, whether it's on Google Drive or, on Notion or stuff like that. But I was surprised to learn that some people don't. James is an example. Sometimes when I ask him to find stuff from his past, he's like, I don't have like a place that I go to. And I will say it's helped me a lot in my life. So yeah, that's one of the first habits that I've built up over the years, is keeping an organized system, somewhere to house my life digitally that I can just reference all the time. This next habit is one that I've had to grow out of. In my early 20s, my social life really consumed of me trying to seek out people that I thought were cool. And in some ways, I think in your 20s, you should meet people that you find very cool. But that was the number one trait that I looked for in people when I made friends, when I made connections. And it's not like I dismissed people that I thought were not cool, like I still made friends with that, but I really actively wanted to build a network of people who I found cool. And cool can be many different things. I think when I first moved to the city and started making friends and networking and stuff like that, I sought out people who were creatively cool, because that was something that I felt like was very lacking in my own life. And one of the habits that I've grown out of is the pursuit of coolness. In a way, I think my definition of coolness also has evolved and grown and become broader. But I think when you're in your 20s, you feel an urge to find the coolest people that you can find. After a while, I realized that just because someone is cool doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good friend or that they're going to be compatible with me. That's another thing. Or that I would really even enjoy spending time with them. I mean, there's not a friend that I have in my network that I don't enjoy spending time with them. But I realized that for a while, all my friends that I had built up were friends that, for example, partied a lot and always, went out, and they were all like life of the party, because that to me was really cool back then. And as I've learned to build friendships around other things, I think my definition of cool has also evolved, because I had a very narrow conception of what was cool. I think when I was in New York City for, the first full year of my life, I thought people who were doing creative stuff was like top tier of coolness. If someone was telling me that they were a freelance designer or, they DJ'd and stuff like that, I'd be like, oh my God, you're so cool. But over time, I've realized that that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be, your best friend, or even in your friend group, or even someone that you should model your life after. It's really nice to meet cool people. It's really cool to meet cool people. It's really cool to be inspired by people that are doing cool stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to align with them always. And I think that was something that I grew out of, because after a couple of months, or honestly, maybe even like the first 2 years of being in New York City, I realized that my social circle was built around all these people that I really didn't have deeper connections with. And so that ultimately led to a bigger habit or lesson that I've learned, which is not to align with people just because they're cool. I've talked about this before, but different friends serve different purposes. And I think if you just focus on one thing when you're building out your friend circle, you won't have certain needs satisfied by your friends or the people that you know. And over time, I've really learned to value people in different ways and also just to redefine what is cool. Nowadays, coolness is not just defined by people who are doing creative stuff, but it could be someone who's really passionate about whatever they're doing, whether it's like chess or gardening or anything else. So yeah, I wanted to throw that one in there because I think building friendships and creating social circles is a huge part of your 20s. And I feel like I've definitely approached it in many different ways through every chapter of my life. The very first half of my 20s was so vibes based. And I think there's so much value in other people besides just the vibe that they give off. Also, one more thing I wanted to throw on about that is I think you should always give people a chance. I feel like I experience this a lot in the creator space, but sometimes people don't really give other people a chance because they think that someone's not cool by default because of, for example, their niche. I have some friends who are non-lifestyle creators and they've always told me how much they get disregarded by lifestyle creators because in the creator space, being a lifestyle creator is like higher in the hierarchy of what niches you can be in. So my friends who are like educational creators have complained about, how snooty lifestyle creators can be. And I think friendship shouldn't fit into a specific model. And especially if that model is driven by one variable, I think you severely limit yourself from actually building more fruitful connections with people if you're just pursuing one thing. This next habit is pretty straightforward. I feel like the lessons and the habits I'm sharing today aren't really so novel or unique, but I think it might be helpful to kind of reiterate. Like me personally, sometimes I forget things or I don't really take things to heart because I don't hear other people talking about it. So hopefully this episode can just serve as a reminder or a gentle nudge in a life change or a life habit for you. And yeah, just a disclaimer, because I feel like sometimes I feel the need to make mind-blowing statements on the podcast, but oftentimes the most simple things drive the biggest change. So yeah, this next habit is saving money. This sounds like this is very intuitive. I don't have a profound thing to say here, but I will say that saving money and having that habit of having a little more frugality has helped me tremendously, especially in the second half of my life. One thing that really surprised me in my 20s, and as I've made more friends over time, is I just get really surprised how little people save. And it might be because we're in an era of consumerism and there's just always so much digital advertisement and like consumeristic content being shown to you, literally people being purely like consumer creators where they're just selling you things. And then not to mention the rise of TikTok Shop and other platforms where they encourage you to buy stuff. I think it's been harder and harder to save money. And from my parents' generation, probably from your parents' generation, you'll notice a higher sense of frugality or saving your money or building up your net worth. Over the years, I've actually met a ton of people that tell me that they barely have any savings and that they spend most of their earnings in the month that they get it. To each their own, because I can't tell you what to do with your money. But personally, my mindset around saving money comes a lot from having scarcity mindset growing up and not always having a safety net financially to fall back onto. And with that, I feel like I actually had to undo a lot of my savings habits where I end up not ever spending money on indulging or the latest gadget or, new stuff. I actually always felt like I needed to find a bargain in order to justify a purchase. So if I needed to get a phone upgrade, I would wait till, for example, Black Friday or some other time to spend. Recently, in the last 3 years, and actually ever since our cat had FIP, I've learned that there are certain things that you should just spend on. And the reason I say FIP is it was so hard because we were paying like thousands of dollars for our cat's vet bills and surgeries. And so in that moment, I feel like I actually learned how to spend money. And since then, I've been a little bit better where if there's something that I like or something that I see that I really, really want, I will not have to find reasons for myself to spend. I remember when I first started working as a software engineer, and when I joined, there was like an orientation class and I made a few friends through that. But I got very surprised to learn that a lot of people were living in apartments that were way way more expensive than mine. So for some context, the last 5 years that I've lived in New York City and now adjacent, I've tried to keep my rent pretty low because rent in New York City and everything in New York City actually is so expensive. And so my first year of New York City living, I split this 1-bedroom apartment in Hell's Kitchen with my roommate. We actually had a flex wall. So the living room was cut in half and I was living in the flex room. No closets, but really big window. And I remember I really loved having big windows. I think that's where my obsession with big windows started. But I remember I was paying like $1,200 a month for that specific flex room. In other states, $1,200 is a lot. But in New York City, that's actually pretty low. This was granted a couple of years ago. But I remember the second time that I was in New York City, I also had a roommate. My rent was $1,700. And then after that year, I had moved in with my boyfriend and we stayed in an apartment where we were splitting the rent. And so each of us was also paying $1,700. I explicitly remember the first year that I was working as a software engineer, and so many of my coworkers, like we would talk openly about where we're living, how much we're paying for rent. And so many of them were in like the $3K to $5K range for a studio apartment in West Village or a 1-bedroom in Chelsea, just to be close to the office. And I remember thinking that that was actually so blasphemous because I just couldn't imagine a world where I'm paying $80K, $100K on rent. But I will never regret being frugal about rent because I think over the years that has just compounded, and the amount that I've been able to save through finding nice places in Brooklyn versus trying to be in Manhattan has allowed me a level of freedom that I have now ever since quitting my job that some of my peers don't really have. A few months ago, I actually had this conversation with a friend who was also a software engineer, and I remember I was so shocked to hear that they didn't even have 100,000 in savings. We've been working in tech for many years at this point. We're in our late 20s. And it just shocked me that they spent most of their earnings every single month on things like clothing and watches, bags, rent, things like that. And like I mentioned earlier, like you do whatever is comfortable for you. But a lot of people ask me nowadays, like, how are you so comfortable leaving a corporate job and not having that stability? And I always explain it as I took these steps in my life in my early 20s to save so much money that now in this current time, I can afford giving myself a little bit more space to take risks. And so being frugal and being mindful of my money has really afforded me the lifestyle that I have now, which is more freedom to experiment, to create, to try different things, to not be so terrified of not having a stable income. And also given me a lot more leeway to think about the bigger vision when it comes to my finances and where I can invest my money and what I can do with it. I don't like to talk about finances so explicitly because it does always, I think, trigger people. And I recall this other creator that I really admire, she was talking about how as a woman, if you talk about finances, you will just generate a lot of criticism. But I wanted to throw in that habit there because I think that was a really defining habit in my 20s that came out of having scarcity mindset, but really has served me very well in the second half of my 20s. So be frugal where you can. Obviously, don't be so frugal where you can't live your life and enjoy life, but you'll be grateful that you have savings and you'll be grateful that you put your money where it's smart to put your money, like investments or other things like that later down the line when you're older. Alrighty guys, let's take a quick break to talk about traveling. One of the most stressful parts of any trip is figuring out how to stay connected while you're abroad, especially when you're researching confusing roaming costs or where to get a local SIM. It can be a surprisingly frustrating part of a trip, which is why I'm here to recommend Saily. Saily is a worldwide eSIM brand, and it's actually brought to you by the creators of NordVPN, so you know it's legitimate. This service is a game changer because an eSIM provides you with an internet connection wherever you travel, and it saves you money on crazy roaming fees. They offer super affordable plans in over 200 destinations, and the best part is you only have to install the Saily eSIM once. You don't have to install a new one for every single country you visit. You just land and you connect. No more waiting in those airport lines for local SIM. It's quick, simple, transparent, and keeps you connected so you're never wandering around looking for public Wi-Fi. And because you're a Soju Shoddy listening to the show, you get an exclusive deal for your next trip. Download the Saily app right now and use code SOJU at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount on your first purchase. So one of the other habits that I've learned in my 20s is to reframe situations. Growing up, I felt like I had a lot of victim mindset, especially around being low income and not having the resources that other kids had. In my head, I was always like, I can't do this. because I don't have this. Like, I don't have these resources. I don't have money. My parents can't help me with certain things. And I would always not do things because of that. So if I had an idea as a kid for like a business or a project or something that I just wanted to spend my time doing, I would say, well, I cannot buy the equipment for this, so therefore I can't do this. I remember as a kid, oh my God, I'm trying to recall her name, but there was this girl in fashion and she was like 13 years old. I think her name was like Tavi Jevinson, but she broke into the fashion space as like a child. And I remember being like, well, that can't be my reality because Tavi probably had, parents with money or connections or things like that. And the paralyzing thing is when you think that way, you just end up never even trying at things. So maybe I wouldn't have had, the right opportunities or have been in the right location to be in fashion as a 10-year-old. But the longer you hold on to the belief that you can't do things because you have certain limitations, the longer you spend thinking about it and not doing it versus actually just giving yourself a go with whatever resources that you have. And so something I've learned in life is just to play the cards that you're dealt. Sometimes people are dealt better cards, sometimes people are dealt not so good cards, but as long as you try to strategize and be mindful of like what cards you do have in life, it does help you because then you have this mindset of let me take action with whatever I have versus let me wait until when I have these resources. There will always be infinite reasons to not do things. I have a friend who's really inspirational to me, but she started doing content without having a formal camera. I often hear people say, I can't vlog until I get a really nice camera, or I can't do this singing content because I don't have a nice microphone, or I'm not in the right headspace right now to work on a project that I want to work on. I used to always operate with that mindset that when things are better, I'll start doing something. But the reality check is that things sometimes don't get much better or don't get to the point where you feel comfortable to start completely. One of the ways that I've learned to reframe situations is instead of saying, this sucks, I can't do it, I try to reframe it into, this is a learning opportunity. How can I do it with whatever I have? I remember when I was starting up content, I tried filming videos for the first time actually when I was living with my first roommate in that flex bedroom where my room was split with like a flex wall. So the living room and in my room were like adjacent. And I remember I tried filming my first YouTube video there and it was so scary because I had a roommate. And for a while I was like, maybe I'll wait till I don't have a roommate to film content. Honestly, that never happened because after I was living with her for 5 months, the pandemic happened and then I had to move back home where I really just had no privacy. But even in light of that and in light of me thinking that my room was so ugly because I had all this like secondhand furniture that I had gotten off of Facebook Marketplace in my room and everything just did not look the way that I wanted it to, I still tried my very best to start filming, to start doing something even when the situation wasn't perfect. And as much as it did suck having to be kind of quiet filming and feeling like my room wasn't a good representation of me, I still did it. I didn't post those videos ever because they were just so bad. But when I moved back home, I was like, okay, maybe my life situation won't change because now I'm forced to film videos in front of my home where that was like the only space that sunlight would come into our home. And my grandma and my mom would always be in the background because there's this like long hallway in our old home that would lead from the front of the home where the sunlight would come in to the kitchen where my mom and my grandma would always be. So I remember filming my first couple of videos in front of them. Eventually I mustered up the courage to actually post these, but it was just a very hard time, like in terms of trying to find the space to actually be a creator. Also kind of embarrassing because I would film at the front door and so sometimes the neighbors would see me. But I just remember thinking, I don't think things are going to ever be perfect. I don't think things are ever going to get better. So whatever I'm dealt with, if it's just one little front door entryway where I can film my video, I'm going to do that. If you're a longtime viewer of me, you probably remember the iconic little hallway that I would film my videos in, but I did all my makeup videos there. I bleached my eyebrows there. I did all these random things with what I felt like I was dealt. And I think with this habit of kind of reframing your own life situations, it also teaches you to just take action because a lot of the times what stops you from actually evolving and growing is just not taking action. Along that vein, positivity has also helped me. So when you reframe situations and instead of saying this sucks, and changing it to this is a learning opportunity, you also reframe your attitude towards things, and it becomes more positive. And with more positivity also comes more motivation and more encouragement to actually get stuff done. The next few habits that have changed my 20s actually are habits that I've picked up the last year or so, maybe in like the last half of my 20s. And I actually want to attribute these habits to being self-employed. Everyone always tells you that once you're self-employed, your mindset shifts and you're going to learn so much about yourself and you're going to grow and things are going to like suddenly start clicking in your head. I guess I didn't actually understand the extent to which things change in your head, but I feel like I've been going through so many revelations lately that it's gonna sound kind of like what kind of BS is she on, or what kind of like spiritual course is she taking right now? I stand by what people say. I really do stand by the thought that any sort of leap of faith that you take, you suddenly get thrown on this lifelong journey of learning about yourself more, of seeing past the matrix, of feeling more clarity around your life, that I think is very, very valuable. So all three of these habits, I think, came more clearly to me the last year, ever since I quit my job, ever since I launched my small business, ever since I threw myself more into my passions and my hobbies. I think I am very grateful for the time I've had to learn these. This first habit from the last half of my 20s is taking a learner's mindset. And I say this is a really recent habit because after college, I never felt the sense that I needed to learn so much. Like I felt like my period of learning was kind of over. And a misunderstanding that I had in my early 20s was that I'm a fully formed adult. You know, my mindset's set, my opinions on things are set. The way I see the world is like the most clear way that I'll see the world. And once you're an adult, nothing changes. I understand now why people, when they're in their 80s, 90s, like when our grandparents talk to us and give us lessons, why they feel so strongly about the lessons that they give, because they've walked through life longer. They've lived so much more. They've had more experiences to derive their lessons from. And when I was in my early 20s, I think I was so naive about things. I think I just didn't understand how the world worked, no matter how much I thought I did. And so one of the things that I stopped doing after college is really putting myself in the seat of being a learner. So this habit of adopting a learner's mindset actually comes from a little tip that my boyfriend gave me. A couple of months ago, he told me that I should try to start learning again. And I think he's seen in me the last couple of years that whatever my ways were, however I did one thing, there's a saying where however you do one thing is how you do everything. I think that way that I've done things has never really changed the last couple of years. So once I started the self-employment hustle and grind, I think I've been brute forcing a lot of things, because in college, you know, I would always take on tasks myself. I would always like put the burden onto myself to do everything myself. And lately, my boyfriend has noticed that it's caused me a lot of trauma and struggle to be handling everything myself. And so he actually explicitly told me, Sarah, I think you should start listening to podcasts and actually listening to people that you want to model yourself after. I've been very open to feedback and advice and even criticism. And so I started doing that. There was a period where I listened to podcasts. This was actually before I started my own podcast, but for some reason, ever since I started my own podcast, I stopped listening to other podcasts, ironically. But I actually took his advice and I started listening to podcasts. And I used to passively listen. So if someone would give an advice like, oh, you shouldn't do all the work yourself, like you need to start learning and delegating work, I would hear it and I would be like, that makes sense, but I would never apply it to my life. And lately, anything that I hear from podcasts that's helpful, whether it's a business podcast or like a life mindset podcast, I have been taking to heart so much. And that's when I made the realization that I stopped being a learner for the last couple of years, because I realized that I never took advice seriously because I thought that I knew everything that I needed to know. So when it came to things like, okay, you need to delegate work, you need to like not do stuff just yourself, or you need to build up your gut instinct, you need to build up your trust in yourself, those certain things, I would always be like, okay, sure, but I do things this way. And ever since he told me that advice, I've been listening very actively to podcasts. I've been very, very explicitly trying to take something I learn and apply to my life. And I think that has had profound impacts on my life. Whether it is me actively trying to now work with other people so that I don't have to brute force everything in my life, whether it means trying to build up my gut instinct around things and trying to understand how, for example, stuff works on the consumer side and trying to be mindful of like consumer experiences, trying to expand my understanding of how other people perceive things. I think I've just been very, very much in a growing phase ever since then. And taking a learner's mindset only allows you to evolve and become a better person, but also a better blank, like whatever you want to be. For me right now, it's a better business owner, small business owner. But on the topic of podcasts, though, I actually do want to recommend 2 podcasts that I listen to. So one is the Melody Hobson podcast that she did on Aspire with Emma Grede. That one was very insightful. I felt like I really resonated with a lot of what she said, and also her upbringing. It kind of reframed the mindset of perfectionism and upholding a certain quality of work. She also went to the same college as I did, so that was really cool to hear about as well. But I think from that one, I learned a lot about holding myself to a certain standard of work. And that's a good example of something that I feel like my mindset's evolving towards just because I'm taking up a learner's mindset, which is realizing that whatever I output in life, that quality of work is a reflection of myself. And so I've been trying very hard to actually have a certain standard for myself when it comes to doing things and not be sloppy about pretty much every part of my life. Also, another very interesting one, I've been listening to a lot of like business podcasts recently. I'm looking off to the side just to make sure I don't butcher this, but Hamdi Ulukaya, the founder of Chobani, also did an episode on the How I Built This podcast. That one was a really interesting entrepreneurship story. Like, I think it was a very engaging story in itself. A lot of the times when I listen to podcasts, I feel like people's stories are roughly the same. Like, they worked really hard, they got to a certain point, and success came. I'm synthesizing, but I think Hamdi's story was so interesting. Like, he worked on his professor's farm and then came up with the idea of Chobani. His brother came with cheese and they were selling cheese. Just like a really interesting story. So if you want a good listen, that is also a good one. And let me know if you guys like podcast recommendations. I might do a few more. Also, if you have podcast recommendations or media recommendations, I would love to hear it. I'm always now on the lookout for really interesting, inspirational, informative, educational, just like anything you guys recommend, I will probably take a listen to. Something I've also been recently building up is the habit of trusting myself. Since listening to a lot of these podcasts, I've learned that a lot of successful people and also people, a lot of advice that people give in general is to trust your gut instinct, because a lot of the time self-doubt or listening to other people's advice will just kind of like lead you astray, because everyone has their own opinions but also like ulterior motives when they give you advice. So I was listening to this interview with the Nasty Gal founder, Sophia Amoruso, and she was saying that her investors had a different opinion and a different mindset about how to approach, this really big $400 million deal that was presented in front of her, because they had a different motive or a different driving force than Sophia did. And ultimately, trusting the investor's advice kind of was the wrong thing to do. And she also has a really interesting story. So if you guys want to listen to, I think she did an episode with Stephen Bartlett. But I've heard this advice over and over again, which is just to build up the trust with yourself and like trust your gut instinct. And that's something that I'm learning to do, because I have a lot of self-doubt when I approach things. And I also doubt my ability to succeed, which is very toxic and very negative. And if you can't trust yourself, then what makes you think that you can trust other people, right? This is very intuitive, but I think me, along with a lot of people that I know, have a hard time fully trusting their gut instinct. The last habit that I think has helped me in my 20s is learning to do things alone. I've actually never lived alone before. I guess the only time I lived alone was when I studied abroad for 1 semester. But even then, I felt like I was always around people, or James was visiting me. So then it never felt like I was truly alone. But I had this fear of doing things alone for the longest time, because I felt like I would, one, look lame and look like a loser eating dinner by myself or going to the movies by myself. And two, I also felt like I couldn't enjoy things by myself. Like if I was going on a vacation, what would I do if I don't have someone to accompany me? Or what would I do if I don't have someone to talk to? Probably within the last 2 years is when I've learned to be okay doing stuff alone. And that has helped me a lot in terms of my growth mindset. Because when you have the habit of always needing someone to be next to you, it stops you from actually trying new things and also feeling okay to grow. I guess a better way of explaining that is in my early 20s, I had this dream of creating a startup. And the excuse I always gave for not trying at it is that I don't have a co-founder yet. That mindset carried a lot for my social life where I felt not okay doing things just by myself. And so on the topic of starting a business, of course, it felt very intimidating to not have someone to accompany me. Sometimes startups actually do start from just one person, and it takes a lot of like grit and guts to do that. But for some reason in my head, I felt like it was just not okay for me not to have someone else by my side. And I remember I would always try to like coerce James into doing something together. I always felt like I needed to do stuff together. But in the last year, I think I've shifted my mindset around that a lot. And so even starting this small business last month by myself, it was really intimidating, but I also felt like I could finally do something by myself. And ever since I've learned to do things by myself, I realized I stopped waiting for other people. And there is this one analogy that Michelle Obama said in an interview with Jay Shetty, which is around growing and progressing as a person. And she was talking about how it's kind of like climbing Mount Everest. At the beginning, everyone starts at the bottom of the mountain and everyone's super excited and super eager to start climbing up. They think everyone's going to make it up. But as you start climbing, you notice that more people start dropping off, more people get tired, some people just don't care to make it up there. And so you're presented with like a choice, right? You're presented with a choice of, okay, do I stop myself and do I go down the mountain with people just because they came up, like just because we started in the same journey? Or do I try to climb up because I feel like I can? And I think this analogy was in response to a question about people in her social circle and how she maintains friendships and decides like who stays around in her life. I might be butchering that, but kind of applying it to what I was saying about doing things alone with my mindset of I always need to do something with other people. If I were climbing this mountain, like Mount Everest, and my friends decided that they were too tired for it, I most definitely before in my early 20s would have just gone down with them, even if I felt like I could do it and I felt like I would be so happy at the top and this was something I was looking forward to. No matter what, I probably would have just gone down with my friends. But nowadays, I feel like I would do something different. So I'd probably be like, are you okay if I go up and then I'll come down and meet you guys there? Or, some form of acknowledgement, but also understanding that there's something I want to do that maybe someone else doesn't want to do and trying to move towards that goal post. And that's a really big difference that I was reflecting on recently. But because of that mindset and that habit of now learning how to do things alone, I've also allowed myself just to grow and take leaps of faith quicker, because the moment you start waiting for someone or the moment you delay your own progress or stop what you're doing in your tracks just because of someone else is the moment that you stop progressing. So that is like the last lesson. I hope this episode brought you a little bit of comfort. There's so many other lessons and habits I've learned, but these were the ones that came to mind when I started planning out this episode this morning. So I hope you took something from it. If there's any habits that have helped you as you've navigated your adulthood, also let me know because I would love to learn. And yeah, I think that's it for today's episode. I hope you guys are having a wonderful holiday season, and I will be back next week at home. So James and I might be doing an advice column again. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.